Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, lads and ladettes. My name is Racquet. Welcome to the new episode of Core Concepts. Of course, I haven't made content in quite a while because of me wanting to refine things a little bit more. Quality over quantity, of course. My goal was to make more than 3 videos a week specifically for concepts as well. But I thought I'd wait a little bit straight after Christmas, have a new webcam, have different sets of lighting, new sort of improvements of the overlay. Of course, previously we added the intro as well, so why not sort of try to revitalize everything? But enough of that. Just a small plug. If you haven't already, feel free to like the video. If you don't like it, well, dislike it. But subscribe if you haven't too. If you enjoy the content genuinely, follow my Twitter. That will be down below as well, and Twitch. Be streaming a lot more often considering this new webcam and new tricks I can do with it as well. But yeah, enough of that. Onto the series. Putting context with statistics. This is quite an interesting subject, I feel, because a lot of people tend to fall within the trap of statistics, and I feel like Winston's lab is a very interesting medium that a lot of people refer to, and I feel like it is one of the more accurate websites in terms of statistics, because they genuinely try to put these stats into context as how to, or what is particularly happening in these instances for that particular situation to rise. How are these situations being handled? They're really looking in depth on particular moments and trying to find any patterns, routines to see if that statistic is consistent enough. Now, of course, with Overwatch League, they had the preseason and heading in, into the next, we're going to be bombarded with a lot of statistics, and I feel like we really need to do our best on filtering a lot of the information that we're given, right? I guess the typical response once you're in a comp game, let's just do a really basic example. I've did this with one of my really old videos as well. You go into a game, you're playing Genji, and you have a soldier on your team. They have triple tank, and the soldier at the end of the game says, "I have gold damage, Genji, you suck." Now, in that particular situation, if soldier and Genji are at a same skill level, soldier is majority of the time going to have gold damage given that composition, because of course has a lot more to deal with specific tanks. He's obviously much better at dealing with a triple tank composition than what Genji is, and Genji's role within a tank composition or against a tank composition is to go to the supports and take out them to sort of get rid of the foundation of the triple tank composition. And of course, we're never going to get gold damage because soldier is going to be in charge at peppering those tanks down in the meantime, right? Because obviously the rate of fire, the DPS output of soldier is much greater than Genji as well. Genji has burst damage, so you're always going to have more damage soldier in that particular situation. That's just a very blanket situation, right? It's a very basic concept that pretty much a lot of us can grasp, but people still fail to really identify these situations, right? And one of the most crucial elements as well is when we're looking at DPS per minute. That's quite an important stat to see the averages and the consistency of particular players, of course, but that still has the same problem as I referred to. Who are they exactly focusing in majority of those fights? And I feel like that could be quite a cool statistic to implement into Overwatch League as well, to look at what these particular characters are focusing, especially with characters that have a lot more flexibility in what they want to achieve. For example, when you look at Diva, I guess Diva is a prime example. She's one of those heroes that can really do a lot of things at the same time, right? You can peel, you can melt tanks, you can melt squishies with the addition of those micro missiles. So it'd be interesting to see what patterns would develop with a player's particular playstyle, right? What are they looking to achieve in majority of these fights? and what's the average positioning in what they take at the start of the fight, at the end of the fight. And this is particularly linking Diva, because I feel like she's a very good example, but because of her nature, and the playstyles can vary quite a bit. It would be quite an interesting topic to really look at. Now, those statistics can be gathered. It's not too difficult to try and filter out. Of course, there are a few situations where it would be a little bit more difficult to evaluate, but looking at the targets that particular player is targeting, specifically on that hero, and there are plenty of other examples where you can alter targets as well. I guess Tracer, she's a very good tank shredder, but at the same time she can one-clip, squishies in the backline. Where is all that damage going to, and how much of the time is dedicated to those particular targets, right? You can look at supports. Where is the Zenyatta orb being placed majority of the time? You could say 75% of the time it was placed on Winston during dives, or every time a fight was started and they had Dragon Blade, the orb was placed on there. You can make funky statistics relative to what those players want to achieve with their compositions. Look at the patterns that these players are showing, and you can formulate your own recipes as to how to apply it to other particular players too. And with a variety of different playstyles, you start to get different results, different formulas to work with, and it becomes a very interesting aspect that we can all enjoy as spectators, to see, this particular player is much more different than this one. So they aren't exactly bad players, they just have two different ways of approaching the game. The player goes for tanks on this particular hero, but that player favors to go into the backline and neutralize their supports. There are different avenues that we could really take when looking at statistics, and it's important for us as spectators to try and filter that. And as I said, with the given resources that will be available with Overwatch League, it's going to be very interesting to see how a lot of people interpret these. Now, of course, there are going to be so many people who do go overboard, saying, right, this person has done so much damage in this particular match, and we sort of touched on that before. How was that person accumulating the damage? What targets are they focusing? Of course, there's so many different things that you can look at it in the context of that, but I feel like a lot of people could be missing those basic fundamentals, and it's up for the Overwatch casters, the statistics board, to give an introduction to those spectators, an easy introduction as to what to really look at as specifics for those players to recognize, or maybe they could apply it to their own play as well. Because in comp, there are plenty of stupid people. Let's not be shy about saying that. Whether it's because of their egos, or they can't identify their own problems, or they just don't know how to play the game. Of course, Overwatch hasn't necessarily advertised its competitive scene very well globally. Of course, Overwatch League has received a little bit of a bump in terms of that, but in terms of consistent ongoing tournaments other than Overwatch League, Contenders didn't really receive too much of a splash in terms of client-side advertisements. A lot of these people aren't really tuning into these people who try to optimize their gameplay as much as possible. Like, the amount of outlandish statements I hear in comp nowadays just makes me want to not play comp ever again. Let's just put it that way. There are so many stupid people, and the more information you give to these numbnuts, the more they can think about what they're saying. And I feel like that's a lot of the problem with the general community. They just say what's on their mind, or maybe they're trying to think about it, but that's really what they know. They don't know any better. So if they're getting fed with more relevant information, and with this translation of statistics, that could certainly help. It would make the better for everyone. And that sort of can be a negative at the same time. You don't want to see a situation where people are, what's a good phrase, meta whoring. So I guess that's a statement that I just made up, but here's what it generally means: where people think you have to stick to a given composition 100% of the time. Now, this was a problem in a variety of different MOBAs, especially coming from me, who played majority of time on League of Legends before Overwatch came out. They would just try to replicate everything that specific pros would do without realizing, okay, this guy's incredibly talented on that specific hero. That hero maybe not even is maybe good, is maybe not good. But that specific person, that playstyle really does transition well when they link up with that character. And the skill cap, of course, is much different. For example, I mean, you can go up to the highest example for League. You can say, oh, Faker was playing Zed, and he really did well in that particular matchup against, you know, Flash Wolves or something. And then someone, you know, watches that and they say, oh, wow, Faker. Zed must be really strong. And, you know, I think I can replicate Faker. And then they go into, you know, a League of Legends ranked game. I know we're venturing into League, but stay with me here. And just to put it into context, Zed's an extremely difficult hero. Like, the amount of difference you can see between a bronze player and a diamond player, or even a bronze player and like gold player, is absolutely tremendous. And you can really see with the amount of micro plays and individual movements, especially within a MOBA as well. But the skill cap, the skill breach, people don't really tend to get a grasp on that very well, because of course they idolize a particular person and they want to be like that instantly. So their immediate reaction is, all right, we're going to do this straight away, without looking at the nitty gritty and saying, okay, let's work on our basic fundamentals before we try to tackle this, right? So that's an issue that, you know, would happen, of course, once the Overwatch competitive scene gets a little bit more popular. But that's, of course, a little bit of a side rant. It is sort of relative to statistics, though, because it's people getting information within their own database and reacting to it within their own sort of way, without, you know, planting that information properly, right, and not looking at the solid foundation blocks as to how to really build it to that particular point. But what else can we particularly talk about? Now, I don't have any notes around, so I'm pretty much doing this at the top of my dome. That's how incredibly talented we are. No, I'm joking. But okay, so we've gone around statistics in terms of competitive play. You know, looking at how defensive, shielding, damage, healing can be put into context as to what it's being majority used on, what it's been focused on, and to determine how much they get out of that particular use of, you know, shields, healing, or damage. We've gone through people in, you know, your comps, their mentality as how they use their statistics, and of course gold medals is the general way that everyone tends to approach. What else could we really talk about? Of course, talking about skill ceilings and seeing that different players can bridge the gap much easier depending on your particular rank and skill levels. And I guess we're going to look into that a little bit more, and in terms of evaluating your own play based on tendencies and the values that you prioritize as a person. So what does that particularly mean? It means that so a lot of people need to look at an outside perspective, and POVs are incredibly important. I cannot stress that enough. So what I like to do when specifically looking at you know, a POV of a player, or looking at a team VOD or whatever, is that sometimes I will just completely zone out and tunnel vision a particular player and see how their response is given a particular situation. So you're looking for patterns within a playstyle, right? You're looking at, look at a Lucio, for example. Let's pretend this Lucio majority of the time decides to use Sound Barrier to engage. Does that favor the team's playstyle? You know, listening to the comms, the shot caller called it, right? There are so many different perspectives and angles you can try to look at, especially as a person who is trying to analyze the game, as to what the thought process was behind that particular play. Now, where statistics come in this particular situation is you can look at the flip side, right? Flip the coin. What happens when that person uses it defensively? And why would they use it defensively? You could say, you know, given statistic, 60% of the time when he did use Sound Barrier defensively, or I guess we'll amp it up a little bit more, no pun intended, 80% of the time when it was used defensively, it was up against a Dragon Blade. right? So you're putting a little bit of flavor, color to the particular playstyle, because let's just say this Lucio, majority of the time, let's just say 80% of the time, again, was using their sound barrier offensively, but when they used it defensively, 20% of the time, 80% of it, I know that's a lot of percentages, they were using it against a Dragon Blade. So there are so many different angles that you can look at. Of course, you can go even more deep and say, was somewhat low during the sound barrier cast, and the teammate need to be facilitated. You can say, was a specific tank cooldown down? Did he have an ultimate to work with? Did you have an ultimate to neglect? Given that particular situation, we're using it in conjunction with a speed boost, or was it down to try and, care for the fact that he didn't have it available? There are so many different avenues in Overwatch that you can explore, and that's what makes it a very, very interesting game. Of course, you have to take into consideration cooldowns, ability accuracy, aim, of course, and positioning, ultimate charges, the so many different aspects that you can look at when taking into consideration a lot of those things, right? So what is to be taken out of this video? I think I've rambled for a little bit too long. A summarization. I think when looking at statistics, it's important for you to filter out and understand why those given statistics are presented to you. Of course, Winston's lab, they do quite a decent job at trying to look at two particular players and averages of ultimate kills, or cooldowns that are particularly used, or map specific strategies of team compositions on those. And there are so many different avenues that Winston's lab tackle, and it's very good that they're doing that. And of course, I encourage Overwatch League to challenge the statistics and push them, past their boundaries, and give us a little bit of color, give us perspective as to why that particular player is playing like that, why that situation is rising, why is that team so successful with that team, that given composition. Of course, I was planning on doing it a little bit more longer, but I feel like I could extend maybe in the later video, but I feel like I've gone through most of the avenues that I've wanted to so far in this video. I just wanted to get one, out onto the deck. So with the new gear, with the new lighting, with the new camera, and different setups and stuff like that. So appreciate you guys joining in. So remember, once that person comes into your comp game, says he has gold damage, when he's playing, Soldier or like Reaper up against a triple tank composition, and you're playing Genji, you obviously are on the supports every fight because that's what you're supposed to do as a Genji. Just, gladly block him, or block her, block it, if they're communicating in such a horrible way. And enjoy your Overwatch games. Just like what I do, mate. I just join Team Chat, I say, "G'day lads and ladettes," and then I completely mute everything. We're going off track, but thank you very much, everyone. Take care, and enjoy your voyage into the new year.